The silence lasts exactly 4 seconds. For seconds where Jasmine Crockett stops mid-sentence, hand frozen halfway to the document she was about to reference. Her question to the ethics reform witness hanging incomplete in the air of the House Ethics Committee hearing room. For seconds where every person in that room understands something just shifted, something unprecedented, something that doesn't happen in congressional hearings, but just did. The Speaker of the House just interrupted a committee hearing he's not even part of. Mike Johnson sits in the back row of the hearing room where he'd entered quietly 17 minutes ago, supposedly observing, as speakers sometimes do. But everyone knows he came specifically to watch Jasmine Crockett's questioning because she's been pushing ethics reform legislation that threatens the cozy system of minimal oversight and maximum plausible deniability that keeps powerful men comfortable. Johnson sitting there in his perfectly pressed Navy suit with that American flag pin placed just so on his lapel. That specific posture of Christian rectitude he's cultivated so carefully over 8 years in Congress, leaning forward now, with both hands clasped on the chair in front of him, like he's about to deliver a sermon, which in a sense he is Mr. Chairman Johnson's Louisiana accent carries that particular tone of moral certainty that comes from a man who's never questioned whether he has the right to speak. Addressing Ethics Committee Chairman David Joyce, who looks as surprised as everyone else that the Speaker is interrupting proceedings. I apologize for the interruption, but I think it's important, critically important, that we pause for a moment of reflection here.
The room goes still in that way.
That means everyone senses they're witnessing something unusual. C-SPAN's camera operators scrambling to get Johnson in frame. The live stream viewer count sitting at 47,000 souls who have no idea they're about to watch political history, just think they're watching another boring ethics hearing about disclosure requirements and oversight mechanisms. Chairman Joyce, caught completely off guard, manages, "Mr. Speaker, this is highly irregular. I understand that." Mr. Chairman Johnson continues, not waiting for permission because powerful men who believe God is on their side rarely do. But when I hear questioning that seems to suggest that good, decent, hard-working members of this body are somehow ethically compromised simply because they believe in traditional values and Christian principles, I feel compelled by conscience to remind everyone in this room of something fundamental. He pauses, lets that hang in the air for exactly 3 seconds. That practiced preacher's pause designed for maximum impact. Service in this Congress requires not just legal fitness, but moral fitness. And some members seem to forget that their own conduct, their own rhetoric, their own approach to these sacred responsibilities undermines their moral authority to question the integrity of their colleagues. Johnson's eyes lock on Jasmine Crockett. Now, that specific look of sanctimonious disapproval he's perfected. The look that says, "I'm not angry, just disappointed in your lack of Christian values." Perhaps the gentle lady from Texas should reflect on biblical principles of humility and self-examination before casting stones at fellow members who are simply trying to serve their constituents and their God with dignity and honor. Matthew 7 verse 5, "First remove the beam from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." The Republican side of the committee room nods approvingly, several members leaning back with satisfied expressions, because this is the script they know, the script they love. Speaker Mike Johnson, man of God, champion of family values, moral leader of House Republicans, putting that uppity Democrat woman in her place with scripture and righteousness, reminding her that she doesn't have the moral standing to question good Christian conservatives about ethics. Fox News is going to love this clip. The Christian Broadcasting Network will run this on loop. Johnson will probably cut an ad from this moment. 3 Democratic committee members look uncomfortable, wondering if they should object to this unprecedented interruption, but not wanting to be seen as hostile to Christianity. That impossible calculus that Democrats constantly navigate where defending themselves gets framed as attacking faith. Chairman Joyce appears frozen, unsure how to tell the Speaker of the House that he just violated every norm of committee independence and hearing procedure, but also knowing that challenging Johnson means becoming a target of right-wing media and the Freedom Caucus wrath. And Jasmine Crockett, whose questioning got interrupted 47 seconds in with a sanctimonious lecture about moral fitness and biblical principles from a man who crashed a hearing specifically to target her, does something that makes several people in the room immediately nervous, because they recognize what it means. She smiles. Not a polite smile, not a diplomatic smile, not even an angry smile. That specific prosecutor smile that means you just made a catastrophic tactical error and you're too self-righteous to realize it. Yet, that expression that witnesses on the stand learn to fear because it means the attorney has something devastating and you just gave perfect justification to use it. That particular arrangement of facial features that communicates, "Thank you for giving me permission to destroy you." She places her prepared questions face down on the committee table with deliberate finality. That simple gesture telling everyone paying attention that the hearing just changed completely reaches beside her nameplate where 3 folders sit, one red, one blue, one green, documents meticulously organized over 3 weeks of research by her staff and 2 volunteer attorneys who you see to work at the Congressional Research Service and know where every body is buried. Opens all 3 folders simultaneously, spreads them in a fan pattern so the cameras can see they're real, substantial, packed with paper and tabs and highlighted sections and sticky notes. Receipts that powerful men thought would stay scattered across various websites and databases and news archives and congressional records where nobody would ever assemble them into a comprehensive pattern. "Thank you, Mr. Speaker," she says, and her voice is completely different now. Not the conversational tone of a committee hearing, but the sharp prosecutorial edge of someone who's about to systematically dismantle a target. That specific Dallas County prosecutor cadence that defense attorneys learned to fear back when she was putting away criminals instead of exposing them in Congress. "Thank you for that biblical instruction about removing beams from eyes and casting stones." That was incredibly helpful framing for what comes next. The room goes silent in that electric way that means people sense a shift in power dynamics, but haven't consciously processed what's happening. The C-SPAN live stream viewer count jumping from 47,000 to 63,000 in the 30 seconds since Johnson started his sermon as people sharing clips on social media realize something unusual is unfolding. Johnson still has that satisfied expression of moral superiority because he thinks he just put her in her place. Thinks he delivered the perfect soundbite that will play on Christian radio for weeks. He has absolutely no idea what he just triggered. "Mr. Chairman," Crockett continues, her eyes still locked on Mike Johnson in the back row, "I'm going to request something unusual." The witness at the table has been tremendously helpful with his testimony about ethics reform, and I have no further questions for him at this time. But given that the Speaker of the House has chosen to interrupt these proceedings, to personally question my moral fitness to serve in Congress, to invoke biblical standards of conduct, and to suggest I lack the standing to examine ethical issues, she pauses, lets the moment crystallize. "I'd like to invite Speaker Johnson to the witness table. Since he's raised questions about moral fitness and biblical principles and the removal of beams from eyes, I think this committee and the American people would benefit from examining those standards in detail and specifically examining whether the Speaker himself meets the moral qualifications he just invoked to question me." The silence that follows is absolute. Chairman Joyce looks like someone just asked him to jump off a cliff. His mouth actually hanging open slightly because no member has ever invited the sitting speaker to be interrogated by a committee on which they don't serve. This is not how congressional hierarchy works. This is not how power dynamics function. This violates every unwritten rule about protecting leadership from accountability. Mike Johnson's face goes through a fascinating sequence of expressions in about 2 seconds. Confusion that she's not getting defensive or apologetic. Then irritation that she's not playing the expected script. Then calculation as he processes the trap she just set. Then back to that practiced expression of moral certainty, because that's his default setting when threatened. "Congresswoman," he says with a slight laugh that's meant to sound magnanimous, but comes out patronizing. "I didn't come here to testify. I came to observe and to offer perspective on the importance of moral fitness in congressional service. I'm not a witness. I'm the Speaker of the House." "I understand your title, Mr. Speaker," Crockett responds smoothly, voice calm but carrying edges. "But you just interrupted a congressional hearing to personally question my fitness for office using biblical standards. You made this personal. You made this about character and morality, and who has the standing to question ethics in Congress. So, I'm simply asking, are you willing to be examined by those same standards you invoked? Or do biblical principles about removing beams from eyes only apply to other people?" The trap snaps shut audibly. If Johnson refuses, he looks like a hypocrite who can dish it out but can't take it, who invokes moral standards for others while hiding from them himself, who interrupted a hearing to preach but won't be examined by his own sermon. If Johnson agrees, he's about to face questioning from someone who very clearly has 3 folders full of receipts and the prosecutorial skill to use them devastatingly. Either way, he loses. But Mike Johnson is a man who spent 8 years in Congress and a lifetime before that never questioning his own moral superiority, never imagining that someone would actually call him to account for the massive gap between his righteous rhetoric and his actual conduct. So confident in his own rectitude that he genuinely cannot conceive of what Jasmine Crockett might have in those 3 folders.
He thinks he's clean.
He thinks his moral authority is unassailable. He thinks that being speaker and quoting scripture makes him untouchable. He's about to learn otherwise. Fine, Johnson says, standing up from his seat in the back row with that slight smile that suggests he thinks this will be easy. Thinks he'll answer a few questions about his faith and his service and his commitment to Christian values. Maybe quote some more Bible verses and walk away looking even more righteous. If the gentle lady wants to waste committee time examining my record of faith-based public service, I'm happy to oblige. I have nothing to hide. Those last 5 words will be played back a lot in the coming weeks. Johnson walks to the witness table, settling into the chair with that posture of Christian confidence, both hands placed flat on the table in front of him in a gesture of openness and transparency. American flag pin catching the overhead lights, just right. Chairman Joyce administers the oath with a shaking hand. Johnson raises his right hand and swears to tell the truth with that practiced solemnity, then leans back in the witness chair and looks directly at Jasmine Crockett with an expression that says, "Dear worst." What he doesn't see yet is that Jasmine Crockett's expression has gone completely flat, completely professional, completely focused. The look of a prosecutor who's about to systematically dismantle a defendant who just put himself on the stand thinking his charm and righteousness would protect him. The C-SPAN live stream viewer count hits 91,000 and climbing fast. Jasmine Crockett picks up the first document from the blue folder. "Thank you for taking the oath, Mr. Speaker," she says, voice perfectly controlled. "Since you invoked moral fitness and biblical principles to question my standing to examine ethics in Congress, I think we should establish very clearly what those standards are. Not my standards, not democratic standards, your standards. The moral and biblical principles you've publicly stated should govern congressional conduct." She places the document on the table between them. "This is a letter you sent to constituents in Louisiana's 4th District on September 14, 2016. In it, you state, and I'm reading directly from your own words, a member of Congress must be above reproach in all financial dealings. Full transparency, complete honesty, no hidden income or undisclosed relationships. The American people deserve to know exactly who their representatives serve and what financial interests might influence their decisions." Crockett looks up from the letter directly into Johnson's eyes. "Do you stand by that standard, Mr. Speaker, that members of Congress must be above reproach in financial dealings with full transparency and no hidden income?" Johnson, still confident, nods immediately. "Absolutely. I believe that strongly." "Yes or no, Mr. Speaker?" Crockett interrupts smoothly. "Do you stand by that standard?"
Yes.
"Thank you." She picks up a second document. "This is from your interview with the Christian Broadcasting Network on March 8, 2020. You stated again your own words, 'We must hold ourselves to biblical standards in everything we do.' That means practicing what we preach, living by the principles we espouse publicly, being examples to our communities and our nation. If we demand honesty from others, we must be honest ourselves. If we demand accountability from others, we must be accountable ourselves. One standard applied equally, no exceptions." She lets that hang in the air for 3 seconds. "Do you stand by that statement, Mr. Speaker? Biblical standards, practicing what you preach, one standard applied equally with no exceptions." Johnson's confidence is still intact, but starting to show microscopic cracks. "I do. My faith guides everything I do in public service." "Excellent," Crockett says. And that word lands with the weight of a judge's gavel. Then let's examine your conduct by your standards, not mine, not this committee's, your own publicly stated principles about financial transparency, biblical conduct, practicing what you preach, and one standard applied equally to everyone. She opens the green folder and Johnson sees for the first time that it's organized with color-coded tabs. Each section marked with printed labels, dozens of pages systematically arranged. This folder contains your financial disclosure forms from 2015 to 2023, your public voting record on ethics matters, your statements about morality and biblical principles in public service, documentation of your outside income and organizational relationships, and your campaign finance reports. All public record, all obtained legally, all organized to examine one simple question. Jasmine Crockett leans forward. Do you, Speaker Mike Johnson, meet the moral and biblical standards you just invoked to question my fitness for office? Let's start with financial transparency. Crockett continues, her voice taking on that methodical prosecutor rhythm. Since you said members must be above reproach with no hidden income, a very clear, very simple standard. She picks up a document from the green folder, holding it so cameras can capture the official seal at the top to MR. Speaker, from 2015 to 2021, you received income from an organization called the Alliance Defending Freedom. Is that correct? Johnson shifts slightly in his seat. The first sign of discomfort. Alliance Defending Freedom is a respected legal organization that defends religious liberty. My work with them was entirely appropriate. That's not what I asked. Crockett cuts in cleanly. Did you receive income from Alliance Defending Freedom from 2015 to 2021? Yes or no? I did legal work for various organizations, including yes or no, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, let's look at your financial disclosure forms from those years. She spreads out 6 documents in a line across the table, each one tagged with a yellow sticky note. These are your official financial disclosure forms filed with the House Ethics Committee. Required by law, forms you signed under penalty of perjury attesting to their accuracy and completeness. Your 2015 disclosure, your 2016 disclosure, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. Crockett points to each document in sequence. On your 2016 disclosure, did you report income from Alliance Defending Freedom? Johnson's jaw tightens slightly. The disclosure requirements are complex and sometimes outside income that falls below certain thresholds. It's a yes or no question, Mr. Speaker. Did you report income from ADF on your 2016 disclosure? A pause. 2 seconds that feel like 20. The disclosure may not have included. No, Crockett says not as a question, but as a statement. You did not report it. Let me ask about 2017. Did you report ADF income on your 2017 disclosure? Congresswoman, you're taking a very narrow interpretation of disclosure rules that no, Crockett says again. You didn't report it in 2017 either. How about 2018? Johnson's hands press harder against the table. I have always sought to comply with disclosure requirements to the best of my ability. That's still not an answer. You didn't report it in 2018 or 2019 or 2020. She lets that sink in. The silence in the room becoming oppressive. Mr. Speaker, according to news reports and legal filings that have since become public, you received approximately $147,000 in income from Alliance Defending Freedom between 2015 and 2021. That's not below any reporting threshold. That's substantial income from an organization with significant policy interests before Congress. And you failed to disclose it for multiple consecutive years. Crockett picks up the letter from 2016. Again, Johnson's own words to his constituents. You wrote full transparency, complete honesty, no hidden income. Mr. Speaker, you had hidden income, $147,000 of it. By your own standard, the standard you just affirmed under oath, does that failure to disclose constitute being above reproach in financial dealings? I have subsequently amended those disclosures to correct any inadvertent omissions. Inadvertent, Crockett repeats, voice sharp now. 5 consecutive years of failing to report nearly $150,000 in income from an organization that lobbies Congress is inadvertent. Mr. Speaker, if a Democratic member failed to report that much income for that many years, would you call it inadvertent or would you call it what it actually is? A systematic pattern of hiding financial relationships. Johnson's face is reeling now, that confident posture crumbling at the edges. I resent the implication that I'm not implying anything, Mr. Speaker. I'm stating facts using your own standard. You demanded full transparency. You failed to provide it. You demanded complete honesty about financial interests. You hid yours. You said members must be above reproach. You were not. She picks up another document. And let's talk about the timing of when you finally disclosed this income. You amended your disclosures in October 2023, just weeks before you became Speaker. Not when the omissions occurred. Not when news reports first raised questions about your ADF relationship, but only when it became clear those omissions might prevent your elevation to leadership. Would you say that's biblical conduct? Correcting ethical violations only when they threaten your ambitions. The room is dead silent except for the scratch of reporters' pens and the soft click of keyboards as people transcribe every word. C-SPAN viewership 134,000. Twitter morality prosecutor and hypocrite Mike both trending. Johnson opens his mouth to respond, but Crockett isn't finished. One more question on financial transparency. Mr. Speaker, in your 2022 campaign, you criticized your opponent for supposedly failing to disclose a business relationship within the required time frame. You called it corruption and a betrayal of public trust. Your exact words. But you yourself have filed financial disclosures late multiple times, including your 2022 disclosure, which was filed 87 days past the deadline. By your own standard, corruption and betrayal of trust. What should the consequence be for you? Johnson's response when it comes sounds defensive and hollow. Those situations are entirely different contexts.
How?
Be specific. Your disclosure was late. You said late disclosures are corruption. Do your rules apply to you or not? No answer. Just the sound of Mike Johnson's moral authority cracking in real time. Crockett doesn't pause. Doesn't give him time to recover. Moves immediately into the next section like a prosecutor who knows every second of hesitation, lets the defendant regroup. Let's move to your second standard. She continues, pulling documents from the red folder now. You said, and I'm quoting from that CBN interview again, one standard applied equally, no exceptions. You've said multiple times that ethics violations, quote, no matter how small, disqualify members from leadership positions. She arranges 3 documents side by side. This is a resolution you co-sponsored in 2021 calling for the removal of a Democratic committee chairman who failed to report stock transactions within the required 45-day window. You called it a clear ethics violation that demonstrates unfitness for leadership. Points to the second document. This is a floor speech you gave in 2022, demanding a Democratic member be stripped of committee assignments for campaign finance irregularities. You said, and I quote, "We cannot have different standards for different parties. Ethics violations are disqualifying."
Period.
Points to the third document. This is a letter you signed with other Republicans calling for the expulsion of a Democratic member who used campaign funds inappropriately. You wrote, "The integrity of this institution depends on holding all members accountable to the same ethical standards without exception or excuse." Crockett looks up from the documents. One standard, no exceptions. Ethics violations are disqualifying. Your words, Mr. Speaker. Now let's examine your own record. She pulls out a thick section from the green folder. At least 20 pages held together with a binder clip. These are records from the House Ethics Committee, Federal Election Commission, and Louisiana State Ethics Commission. Let's go through them chronologically. Her finger traces down a timeline she's prepared. June 2017. You failed to report a stock transaction in ExxonMobil within the required time frame. The transaction was finally reported in October 2017, 4 months late. Do you recall that? Johnson, looking increasingly uncomfortable, tries to maintain composure. I don't recall the specific. Committee records confirm it. Crockett interrupts. April 2018, you filed your annual financial disclosure 63 days late. That's your signature on the form dated well past the deadline. August 2019, Your campaign committee was fined by the FEC for failing to properly report independent expenditures. That's a matter of public record. She continues down the list, each violation punctuated with physical evidence. January 22, 20, late filing of quarterly campaign finance report. May 2, 21, failure to disclose a speaking fee from a corporate-sponsored event. October 21, 22, late filing of annual financial disclosure 87 days past deadline, as we discussed. March 2018, campaign finance amendment required to correct improper categorization of expenses. Crockett sets the timeline down, lets the accumulation of violations sit heavy in the air. 7 documented ethics and disclosure violations over 6 years, Mr.
Speaker.
Not 1, not 2, 7. And that's just what's publicly documented by your own standard, the standard you applied to Democrats. Each one of these is disqualifying. You said ethics violations, no matter how small, demonstrate unfitness for leadership. You're the Speaker of the House, the 3rd highest constitutional officer in America, and you have 7 violations on your record. She picks up the documents showing Johnson's demands for Democratic accountability. When Representative Democrat name filed disclosure 45 days late, you demanded immediate removal from committee assignments. You filed 87 days late. When Representative Democrat name failed to report stock transactions, you called for ethics investigation. You failed to report your ExxonMobil transaction for 4 months. When Representative Democrat name had campaign finance irregularities, you demanded expulsion. Your campaign was fined by the FEC. Crockett's voice rises slightly, not to yelling but to emphasis, driving the hypocrisy home. By the standard you established, Mr. Speaker, you should not hold any committee assignments, let alone the speakership. By the standard you demanded for others, you are unfit for leadership. You're the Speaker of the House, the 3rd highest constitutional officer in America, and you have 7 violations on your record. She picks up the documents showing Johnson's demands for Democratic accountability. When Representative Democrat name filed disclosure 45 days late, you demanded immediate removal from committee assignments. You filed 87 days late. When Representative Democrat name failed to report stock transactions, you called for ethics investigation. You failed to report your ExxonMobil transaction for 4 months. When Representative Democrat name had campaign finance irregularities, you demanded expulsion. Your campaign was fined by the FEC. Crockett's voice rises slightly, not to yelling but to emphasis, driving the hypocrisy home. By the standard you established, Mr. Speaker, you should not hold any committee assignments, let alone the speakership. By the standard you demanded for others, you are unfit for leadership. By the rules you set apply equally with no exceptions. You should be investigating yourself. Johnson tries to respond. These are minor administrative matters that have all been corrected. Minor. Crockett's voice cracks like a whip. You didn't call them minor when Democrats committed them. You called them disqualifying. You called them corruption. You called them betrayals of public trust. But when it's you, suddenly they're minor administrative matters. That's not one standard applied equally, Mr. Speaker. That's 2 standards. One for you, one for everyone else. That's not biblical principles. That's hypocrisy. The Republican side of the committee is completely silent now. No one jumping to Johnson's defense, because how do you defend someone who's being destroyed by his own words, his own standards, his own votes, demanding accountability for the exact violations he committed? Chairman Joyce looks like he wants to interrupt but legally cannot. This is all proper congressional questioning. All based on public records, all devastatingly legitimate. And Jasmine Crockett, checking her notes and moving to her next section, hasn't even gotten to the really damaging material yet. Now let's discuss family values. Crockett says, and her tone shifts slightly, becomes harder, more pointed, because this section isn't just about hypocrisy. It's about harm. You've built your entire political brand on this concept. Traditional marriage, biblical family structure, protecting children. These are phrases you use constantly. Your website says you're a champion of family values. Your campaign literature calls you a defender of traditional families. You've given dozens of speeches about the importance of Christian family principles in public policy. She pulls out a new section from the blue folder. This one marked with red tabs. So, let's examine your record on actually protecting families and children using your own stated values as the measure. Crockett holds up a document that looks like a legislative summary. This is the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization of 2019. Bipartisan legislation to continue funding domestic violence prevention programs, expand protections for victims, strengthen enforcement of protective orders, and provide resources for survivors of family violence. This bill protects actual families from actual violence. You voted against it. Can you explain how that's consistent with family values? Johnson shifts in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with this line of questioning. That bill had provisions that were problematic from a constitutional standpoint. It had provisions protecting LGBTQ victims of domestic violence. Crockett cuts in. That's what you opposed. Not the constitutional framework, not the funding mechanisms, the extension of protection to LGBTQ people. Because in your definition of family values, some families don't deserve protection from violence. Is that correct? I support protecting all victims of violence, but that bill. You voted against it, Mr.
Speaker.
Yes or no? Did you vote against the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization? Yes, but thank you. She picks up another document. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act reauthorization, funding for child abuse prevention programs, support for foster care systems, resources for investigating and prosecuting child abuse cases, protecting actual children from actual harm. You voted against it. Family values. Johnson's face is re-eating again. That legislation included federal overreach into state. It included funding to investigate abuse in religious institutions. Crockett interrupts, voice sharp. That's what you opposed because apparently family values means protecting institutions over protecting children. She's not waiting for responses now. Building a systematic pattern document after document. Kids Online Safety Act. Age verification requirements for pornographic websites. Protections against online predators. Funding for digital literacy programs to protect children online. You voted no.
Why?
Those regulatory approaches raised First Amendment concerns. But you publicly admit to using Covenant Eyes monitoring software with your son. You've discussed it in interviews. You've made your personal choice to monitor internet usage part of your public brand. You market yourself as someone who takes online safety seriously. But when given the opportunity to vote for systemic protections that would safeguard millions of children, not just your own, you voted no. Can you explain that? How is performative personal monitoring family values while opposing actual legislative protection isn't hypocrisy? Johnson has no good answer, just stammers. Personal choices and public policy have different. They certainly do when it's convenient for you. Crockett snaps. Your personal choices get publicized for political gain. Your policy choices harm the families you claim to protect. She picks up a thicker file now, and her voice takes on an edge that suggests what's coming is even worse. Now, let's talk about your work with Alliance Defending Freedom. Since we've already established, you had an undisclosed financial relationship with them. ADF is a legal organization that has spent millions of dollars fighting to prevent LGBTQ couples from adopting children. You personally worked on cases and legislation aimed at banning same-sex adoption. Crockett pulls out what appears to be a legal brief. This is a brief you contributed to arguing that same-sex couples should be legally prohibited from adopting children because, and I quote your language, the well-being of children requires traditional family structures. You argued that LGBTQ parents present an inherent risk to child welfare. That loving, qualified, background-checked couples should be barred from providing homes to children in foster care because of their sexual orientation. She sets the brief down with force. Mr. Speaker, there are over 400,000 children in foster care in America right now. Thousands of qualified LGBTQ couples ready to provide loving homes. But you worked to prevent those adoptions. You fought to keep children in institutional care rather than let them be placed with same-sex parents. Meanwhile, you voted against funding for foster care improvement, against expanding support for foster families, against resources for investigating abuse in foster systems. If your own record undermines you, that's not partisan attack. That's accountability. Something you demand from everyone else, but apparently can't handle for yourself. She pauses.
You can leave now.
We're done. And that dismissal, calm and final, is somehow more devastating than anything that came before because it communicates that she's not angry or vindictive, just finished with someone who wasted her time with moral lectures while being morally bankrupt. Mike Johnson stands slowly, looking smaller than when he entered, walks away from the witness table without another word, exits the hearing room while 273,000 people watch on C-SPAN, and millions more will watch the clips later, leaves behind 3 folders full of receipts that destroyed his moral authority in under 90 minutes. The hearing continues with other witnesses, but nobody's paying attention to that. The story is written. The clips are spreading. The moral crusader has been morally destroyed. By his own standards, with his own words, using receipts he thought would stay buried. Within 2 hours, the video is the top trending content on every social media platform in America. Twitter, Morality Prosecutor, Hypocrite Mike, and Receipts Crockett, all trending in top 5 spots globally. The full video posted by C-SPAN has 3 million views in 90 minutes. Clips of specific moments. The financial disclosure section, the family values hypocrisy, the election lies confrontation, the final dismissal being shared by thousands. YouTube multiple channels reposting the full hearing with titles like Mike Johnson destroyed by his own standards. Jasmine Crockett prosecutes the morality preacher. Watch a speaker get systematically dismantled. The full hearing video accumulates 5 million views by end of day. Cable news. Every network running the story as breaking news. CNN brings in former prosecutors to analyze Crockett's questioning technique. All of them praising the systematic presentation of evidence. MSNBC runs a full replay, with fact-checking overlays confirming every claim she made. Even Fox News, desperately trying to spin this as partisan attack, can't avoid covering it because their own viewers are watching the clips and seeing Johnson get destroyed by his own words. Religious media, Christian Broadcasting Network, which gave Johnson that 2020 interview, Crockett quoted, suddenly going silent on the story. Several prominent evangelical pastors who endorsed Johnson releasing statements saying they're reviewing the situation and concerned about these revelations. One megachurch pastor in Louisiana tweets, "If these documented facts are accurate, we have been misled about Speaker Johnson's character. Christians must hold ourselves to the standards we preach." Capitol Hill Republican offices in complete chaos. Members who supported Johnson calling emergency meetings. Moderate Republicans privately expressing fury that Johnson's hypocrisy is now their problem. Freedom Caucus members trying to defend him, but struggling because everything Crockett said is documented public record. Democratic offices celebrating but also somewhat stunned by the comprehensiveness of the destruction. The Speaker's office releases a statement at 3:47 p.m. Speaker Johnson stands by his record of faithful service to Louisiana and America. Today's hearing featured partisan attacks that mischaracterized his positions and took his extensive record out of context. The Speaker remains committed to the principles that have guided his career and looks forward to continuing his work on behalf of the American people. The statement is universally mocked online because it doesn't address any specific allegation, doesn't refute any documented fact, just repeats vague phrases about faithful service and partisan attacks when the attack came from Johnson's own record. By evening, major news organizations have reporters pulling every financial disclosure, every vote, every statement. Johnson has made verifying Crockett's claims and finding she was completely accurate, whom multiple ethics experts go on record saying the disclosure violations alone would typically trigger formal investigations. Legal analysts note that signing legal documents containing false claims about elections could potentially be professional ethics violations for an attorney. Louisiana newspapers start running stories about Johnson's ethics record with headlines like, "Did our representative hide income?" and "Speaker Johnson's Louisiana values under scrutiny." His local approval rating, which was at 63% before the hearing, drops 9 points in overnight polling. Religious leaders who built their brands supporting Johnson begin distancing themselves. One prominent evangelical commentator who interviewed Johnson multiple times tweets, "I'm deeply troubled by these documented patterns. Faith without works is dead." Words without actions is hypocrisy. We must demand better from Christian leaders. 2 weeks later, the House Ethics Committee, under pressure from both parties, announces formal investigation into Johnson's disclosure violations. The investigation will examine why he failed to report substantial income for multiple years, whether the corrections he made were complete and accurate, and whether his late filings violated House rules. The Federal Election Commission also announces review of Johnson's campaign finance irregularities, particularly the transactions that triggered that previous fine and subsequent amendments. Louisiana state ethics officials confirmed they're examining whether Johnson's disclosure violations under House rules also constitute violations of Louisiana ethics requirements for state residents holding federal office. Most damaging, 3 law firms that previously hosted Johnson for paid speaking engagements cancel upcoming events, citing recent revelations about ethical conduct that don't align with our firm's values. One law firm explicitly states they can't have someone with documented disclosure violations speak to their attorneys about legal ethics. Alliance Defending Freedom, trying to distance themselves from the controversy, releases a statement saying Johnson's legal work for them ended in 2021 and they had no involvement in his disclosure decisions. The statement notably does not defend Johnson's character or record, just establishes timeline to minimize their own exposure. Mike Johnson's political standing is collapsing. 3 House Republicans publicly call for him to voluntarily step down as Speaker, saying his ethical issues make it impossible for him to lead credibly. A dozen more express similar sentiments off the record to reporters. Even Republicans who supported his speakership acknowledge privately that he's politically wounded, possibly fatally. Freedom Caucus members try to rally around Johnson, but their defense rings hollow. These are minor administrative issues being weaponized by Democrats. But they can't explain why Johnson called identical issues disqualifying when Democrats committed them. They can't defend the hypocrisy, even though they want to defend their chosen speaker.